first time I ever had opioids, I tore my ACL and they prescribed me hydrocodone at the hospital, and it made me so itchy that they had to switch me to Oxycontin. And then after that, I wasn't really addicted. My mom was super careful with the medication, but I knew what it felt like to be numb. And then, so after that, when life started to get difficult, I knew what that feeling was, and I went and sought it out. And at first it was just pills, and that led to a PANA, and then one day I couldn't find a prescription and I started using heroin.
How did opioid use disorder affect your daily life and relationships?
I went from being a really social person who everybody would say was so sweet and kind, and I had so much going for me, to being somebody that wouldn't show up on time or at all. I would lie, I would steal, I would manipulate. I just stopped caring about the people around me and became totally obsessed with my own motives when it came to getting drugs, which became an all-time affair.
What are some of the key moments that led you to seek help?
I remember vividly there was a time where pretty much my whole family knew what was going on, and my brother, my mom, and my dad all kind of cornered me, and they were like, what is going on with you? How can we help? Like, what's going on right now? And I told them that I owed money to a drug dealer and that I just needed $200 to give to them, and that everything would be okay, which led to an ER visit, which led to the psych ward, which led to rehab out of state. That's one of them. Another was just continued failed attempts at geographical changes, substance changes, working for myself, working for other people, making tons of money, not making tons of money. I tried pretty much everything, but I would always end up back on the streets with no place to go, back to my parents' house, trying to get back on my feet and get sober again. Pretty much homelessness and total despair. Those are the things that made me get sober. I've tried using kratom to come off of substances. I've tried using Suboxone. I've tried probation. Probation.
Oh.
I was drug tested on probation, but I could still drink, so that didn't work. I have gone to probably over 36 rehabs. None of those seem to work. I've tried psych meds. The only thing that's been successful in helping me quit drugs and alcohol and stay sober is a 12-step recovery program and finding a power greater than myself. When I was in addiction and using drugs, I didn't have a support system. I had alienated myself from my family. I didn't really have friends because I didn't know how to be a friend. And I didn't have any sense of community because I had spent the previous decade traveling across the United States in a cargo van. So when I decided to get sober, I knew it was important that I settle down somewhere and get connected to a community, which is why I came to St. Augustine, because I knew that there was a community here, a really good recovery community, and I had this longing to be a part of that. So there's the 12-step recovery community, and then I think my family and friends knew that something was different this time, because when I tried to get sober, I wasn't back at their homes. I wasn't asking for their help. I was staying in a hotel. I split up with my boyfriend of 6 years. I didn't have a car. I didn't have a plan. All that I knew was that I wasn't going to ask them for help again, and that I had to do it on my own, for myself, because I just didn't want to feel like I was taking advantage of anyone anymore. With that came beginning of actually being sober and having to rely on people in the recovery community to help me get to meetings, to help me make good choices about maintenance drugs, to help me really get back on my feet and to start inspiring confidence in myself by being self-reliant. The people that I met since getting sober have encouraged me to become the best version of myself that I can be by showing me what they did to get sober. And I didn't always like it, but by taking their lead and following their suggestions, I was able to get moved in somewhere. I was able to get a car under my behind. I was able to show up to meetings and make connections with even more people. After, I don't know, maybe even 2 months of being around the recovery community, I had at least 6 people that I could call anytime that I needed to. One woman who was helping me get to places to try to find rentals so that I could try to find a home. I had people calling me when I didn't show up to a meeting that I was supposed to be at. And then I had friends all of a sudden. And I remember vividly being in my car one night, staying at the St. Augustine Beach Pier and seeing a group of people there from the program and being so ashamed that I was living in my car that I turned the ignition on and I got the hell out of there. And then 2 months later, I was in a home, regularly going to meetings, and I was in that group of people at the pier, laughing and meditating and talking about what a great meeting we were just in.
What are some of the biggest challenges that you faced when you were using?
There are a couple of really low points in my story, one of which being, I was in a rehab. I was walking around trying to find drugs, and I found really bad cocaine in a bowling alley parking lot. And I shot it up, and I got an abscess in my arm. And I was in the hospital for 4 weeks. I almost died because I had an abscess. And I remember being in the hospital in South Florida, and none of my family would come down to see me. And I remember that being a really low point. I've had multiple times where I have been in such a bad psychosis from methamphetamines that they put me in the psych ward because there was really no rehabs or detox centers, and the psych ward is not a fun place for anybody. I experienced different versions of homelessness a couple different times, living in my van, living at hotels, really sketchy hotels, only having enough money for my habit and maybe a value cheeseburger every 3 days, and just not being in my right mind, being hungry, staying up for a week at a time. I've had to go to the ER multiple times because of different circumstances. One time I jumped out of a tree down a cliff and was black and blue all over my body because of a hallucination that I had. I mean, the list goes on and on. I don't get cravings anymore. I more catch myself being ungrateful or dissatisfied or just not having good emotional sobriety, but I don't really get cravings anymore. In the first maybe 2 years, year to 2 years. Triggers were really bad at first because I was struggling with some PTSD symptoms, but I was very lucky in the sense that when I would have something trigger me or I would have a craving at first, it was immediately followed by this feeling of dread. My body would have a physiological response and my stomach would flip and I would get nauseous and just feel absolutely terrified. Terror was what I felt anytime that I would have a memory of using drugs or go past a place that I did drugs. It was just immediately my body was in fight or flight mode like I'd never experienced before. The feeling of withdrawing, I'm gonna use fentanyl for my example because when I was at the end of my drug using, that's what I was on. It's probably one of the worst withdrawals that I've ever experienced because it seems like you're sick every 8 hours. Not only are you experiencing hot and cold chills, you're also experiencing the worst type of anxiety that you've ever had. You're angry, you're irritable. I remember totally trashing my apartment one time in front of my mom because I was coming out of my skin. I know for me, I always used to get really bad restless leg syndrome, and it was winter time when I was withdrawing up in upstate New York. We'd have a foot of snow on the ground, and then I was so skinny and malnourished from being on the drugs that it was physically painful to go outside and try to go walk it off because it was too cold and I just couldn't stay warm, and you're also sweating at the same time. I wouldn't wish it on my worst enemy. I'm grateful that I never have to go through that again.
And what advice would you give to somebody who's struggling right now?
Just grin and bear it and keep telling yourself that you don't ever have to do this ever again. I remember every time that I would go through it, I'd be like, I never want to go through that again, and then I would do it again. So just kind of keep the experience fresh in your mind of withdrawal and use it as a tool in your toolbox. And just try to, stay grateful for the experience so that you can use it in sobriety. In the moment, if you're seeing a doctor, do what they're telling you to do, but really like get a big comfy blanket, sit on the couch, watch some movies, and just get through it.
What are some of the most important factors for successful recovery?
The most important thing for me in my sobriety is honesty. When I made the basic principle of everything that I did in my life honesty, even if it was uncomfortable, even if I knew it was going to cause a mess, I had to start operating out of honesty. It's easier to be honest and apologize than it is to keep lying. Lying keeps you guilty and ashamed and makes you continue to hide things. Whereas if you start walking out into the world being honest and open, then people start knowing how to help you. If you know someone struggling with addiction or alcoholism, I think the best thing that you can do for them is to acknowledge that there's a problem and go to an Al-Anon meeting first and foremost. But then after that, I think there's a lot of guilt and shame that comes from within when you're an addict or an alcoholic, but there's also a lot of guilt and shame when it comes to going back to your family. And obviously family members have a lot of feelings, fears. There's a lot of tension there. I know for me, the most helpful thing that my family did was to not enable me anymore, but also not completely pull back and stop loving me or cut me off emotionally. I think we can be there for people who are still in active addiction and be supportive and encouraging without continuing their problem, or continuing to add fuel to their problem. As far as the community goes, I've been in the presence of people who don't have good experience with people who are homeless or addicted, or alcoholic, and have preconceived notions about who these people are: criminals, thieves, etc. The list goes on. And I think as a society, we need to challenge those ideas and those thoughts. At the end of the day, we're all people living a human experience. We all struggle with different things. One person who's an addict isn't really any different than somebody who overeats. And I think we need to be a little bit more compassionate when it comes to talking to these people. I think as a society, we tend to enable people in their bad behaviors, and we need to get back to a place where we go out with love and compassion while not enabling people. Today, life is beyond my wildest dreams. When I was in active addiction, I never had a plan to make it past 27. I'm 31 now. I was homeless before. I have a beautiful home today. I have 3 children that I love dearly. I have a husband. I'm married. That's insane. I'm literally living the white picket fence existence. That's not something that I ever thought was gonna happen for me. I have my friends, real friends, family members who are extremely proud of me, that talk about me to their friends who have children who are struggling with addiction and alcoholism. I have people reach out to me to ask me questions about being sober and being in recovery. I give back to my community. I give back to people in general. I was really selfish before. Today, I'm all about service. I'm all about doing the next right thing, helping people in a way that's not enabling and compassionate. I go to church and I volunteer. I feed the homeless downtown.
And then takeaway message for people, takeaway message for people who might see this. Just key takeaway, last words.
Do you want it targeted to like addicts, alcoholics, or do you want it targeted to any, like just people at large?
People at large, anybody. Because it could be a family member that sees it. It could be a person who's looking for help. So,
okay. If you know somebody or you are somebody struggling with addiction, remember that this isn't going to last for forever. And oftentimes there's not a whole lot that we can do for those people. Everybody hits eventually everybody is going to hit a bottom that they don't ever want to experience ever again. And that's when recovery starts happening. That was in my early 20s, so about 10 years ago. over the past decade, that's gotten a lot. Heroin has become kind of a rare commodity. All that they have now is fentanyl. So at the end of my using career, fentanyl was really the only thing that I could find. But in the middle there were times that I would try the geographical cure, and I would go to places in the Midwest that the only thing that was available was methamphetamine. And so I also used meth too, and I will say that once I started using meth, I think that was when the darkest part of my addiction really happened, because that was the first time I was dealing with things like psychosis, hallucinations, sleep deprivation, not eating for days on end. And then once I left the Midwest, heroin was always the thing that I really liked doing. It just gets progressively worse. It never gets better. You just end up needing more just to remain not in withdrawals. And then that number that you spend each day keeps going up. By the time I was finished using, I was spending $500 a day on drugs.
How many times do you think you've overdosed?
If I think back over that whole, really, it was a decade of really solid, really heavily using with a couple spurts of sobriety in there between, but no more than 6 months ever. I've probably overdosed over 40 times. There's times where I've woken up after doing drugs where I had peed myself, and one side of my body felt numb. There were times that I woke up with a needle in my arm. There was one time that I overdosed, and the one thing of Narcan that the person with me had wasn't enough. I was pronounced dead for 2 minutes before they could get my heart going again, and I think they Narcaned me like 6 or 7 times. I woke up in the hospital having no recollection of them trying to revive me, but I'd say upwards of like 40 times probably that I've overdosed. I would not be alive right now without Narcan. Narcan has saved my life numerous times. There was a point in my addiction where I knew that if I didn't have Narcan on my person, that there was 100% a chance that I would die at any given moment, anytime that I used drugs. If I didn't have Narcan on me constantly or be able to readily get it, I wouldn't be here today. If you are using, make sure you use with a buddy and make sure that buddy has Narcan.
Do you think that fentanyl testing strips would have kept you from using?
No.
No, I feel like it's going to make people like, this is the stuff. If you're looking for fentanyl, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Fentanyl testing strips. I think most people would rather have heroin because the withdrawal symptoms, like you can go 24 hours after using heroin without having withdrawal symptoms. It takes like 24 hours. With fentanyl, it's 8 hours. So like, if I was looking for a drug to go relapse on, I would love to have fentanyl testing strips because I would stay the fuck away from it for the sole fact that like, I don't want to be sick after 8 hours.
Relapse time is like, okay.
The other struggle with getting off of fentanyl specifically is that, at least when I was coming off of it, is that, and I went to a drug program to get off of fentanyl, is that they were having a hard time treating fentanyl withdrawal because it stays in your body for longer. They were recommending that you gradually stop taking fentanyl while gradually upping your doses of Suboxone.
Interesting.
So it was like a descent of fentanyl and an ascent of Suboxone, so that, because if you take Suboxone too quickly when you're coming off of fentanyl, you'll send yourself into precipitated withdrawals, which is the depths of hell.
Like, past Ellie's on her phone scrolling and she comes across this video, what would you say to her?
I would tell her to go get help, go to therapy, stop beating yourself up, stop being mean to yourself, stop hating yourself. One day you will love yourself. One day things will be better. Sobriety does happen.